Breaking update.
At exactly 4:18 Universal Time Coordinated, something unexpected appeared simultaneously across multiple observatories on different continents. Welcome to Cosmic Enigma.
Not static.
Not background interference.
Not a system error.
What was detected was structured. A controlled signal, emerging from an interstellar object that until now had remained silent. Astronomers monitoring live telemetry watched as a pattern formed where randomness should have ruled. For the first time, an object that entered our solar system unnoticed years ago changed its behavior. And no known natural process can explain why. This moment forces us to reconsider everything we thought we understood about visitors from beyond our star system.
Stay with us.
Because what you're about to hear is not science fiction. It is happening now. And remain until the end of this video, because what scientists discovered next transformed a mystery into something far more unsettling. This is not a story about belief. It is a story about measurement. About instruments that do not imagine, they record. And what they recorded changed the conversation forever. The first alerts did not come from a single telescope. They came from a network. Independent systems, operated by different agencies, detected the same anomaly within seconds of each other. A spike in the X-band spectrum. Then confirmation from Europe. Then synchronization from the southern hemisphere. Each instrument saw the same thing.
At the same time.
At the same frequency. This was not coincidence.
This was coordination.
As reports flooded in from research centers around the world, a quiet realization spread through the scientific community. Something unprecedented was unfolding. Within minutes, observation priorities changed. Telescopes designed to study distant exoplanets were redirected. Long-planned surveys were suspended. All attention shifted to a single object drifting silently through our solar system. An object that, until now, was considered inactive. That deviation was measured at just a fraction of a millimeter per second squared.
To the untrained eye, insignificant.
To orbital analysts, unmistakable. In space, motion is predictable. Objects follow paths dictated by gravity, momentum, and energy exchange. When something deviates, there is always a cause. But this time, every known cause failed. No nearby planetary body could account for the shift. Solar radiation pressure was too weak. There was no visible plume, no debris trail, no sign of material being expelled. Yet the trajectory changed.
Not abruptly.
Not violently.
But smoothly. As if corrected.
This alone was enough to raise alarms among those watching closely. Because natural objects drift.
They do not adjust.
That deviation was measured at just a fraction of a millimeter per second squared. To anyone outside the field, it would have seemed insignificant. But in orbital mechanics, nothing moves without a reason. In space, trajectories are governed by gravity, momentum, and energy exchange. When an object deviates, analysts can almost always point to a cause.
This time, they couldn't.
No nearby planetary body exerted enough influence. Solar radiation pressure was far too weak. There was no visible plume, no debris trail, no sign of material being expelled. And yet, the trajectory changed.
Not abruptly.
Not violently.
Smoothly. As if corrected.
That alone was enough to unsettle those watching the data in real time. Because natural objects drift. They do not make adjustments. 11 hours later, the situation became even harder to dismiss. Infrared sensors detected a sudden rise in temperature along one hemisphere of the object. The increase was rapid, climbing from near absolute cold to nearly double its previous level in less than 20 minutes. If solar heating were responsible, the temperature would have risen evenly. If the object were rotating, the warmth would have shifted across its surface.
Neither happened.
The heated region remained fixed. The object was not tumbling. It was holding an orientation. And in deep space, maintaining orientation requires control. Control requires energy. And energy applied with direction implies intent. Shortly after, another change appeared in the data. The light reflected from the object shifted sharply. What had previously occupied the near-infrared range collapsed into a narrow ultraviolet band. Extremely narrow.
Extremely precise.
Centered on a wavelength every astrophysicist recognizes, the hydrogen Lyman alpha line. This frequency is commonly used as a diagnostic marker in space science, but it is rarely observed as a clean, isolated emission from inert objects. There was no surrounding hydrogen cloud.
No coma.
No chemical process capable of producing it. The emission appeared.
Pulsed twice. and vanished. Then came silence.
For 6 hours, the object did nothing. No signals. No thermal variation. No further movement. Just a silent body drifting through space. Until 4:18 Universal Time coordinated. That was the moment the universe changed its tone. The signal returned, unmistakable and precise. The first pulse lasted exactly 1.337 seconds. The second followed after a measured pause.
Then a third.
The intervals were not random. They followed mathematical relationships that arise only in systems governed by deliberate timing. Prime spacing. Consistent repetition. Perfect synchronization across multiple spectral bands.
Radio. Microwave. Optical. All aligned.
No known astrophysical mechanism behaves this way. Not in objects of this size. Not under these conditions. At an estimated diameter of just a few hundred meters, the object should not have been capable of producing emissions so focused, so coherent, and so efficient. At that moment, the classification changed. What had been called an anomaly could no longer be dismissed as one. Inside monitoring facilities, the atmosphere shifted.
Conversation stopped.
Scientists are trained to doubt first. Their instinct is to assume error, miscalibration, or software failure. Those possibilities were tested immediately. Calibration logs were reviewed. Independent instruments were cross-checked. Redundant systems confirmed the same result.
Different observatories. Different continents.
Different wavelengths. All reporting the same conclusion. The object was not simply emitting energy. It was shaping it. And shaping energy is how information is carried. That was when the central question quietly transformed. Not what is it made of, but what is it doing? Because natural objects radiate. They reflect.
They decay. They do not communicate.
From that point forward, the discussion was no longer confined to astrophysics alone. It became a question of systems, of control, and of purpose. And as emergency meetings were quietly assembled behind closed doors, one realization spread through the scientific community with growing clarity. Whatever 3I Atlas was, it was no longer behaving like a passive interstellar visitor. And what followed next would force humanity to confront a possibility it had only ever debated in theory. Within hours of the confirmation, the response was immediate but invisible to the public. Encrypted channels activated. Observation logs were restricted. Emergency meetings were scheduled without announcements or press releases. Across multiple institutions, the same unspoken rule applied.
Listen first, speak later.
At research centers and space agencies, teams were assembled not only from astrophysics, but from mathematics, signal analysis, and information theory. The question was no longer whether the signal was real. That had already been settled. The question now was whether it could be explained. Initial hypotheses focused on unfamiliar but still natural mechanisms. Exotic plasma interactions. Resonances amplified by interstellar magnetic fields. Rare but theoretically possible energy cascades. Each model was tested against the data. Each one failed. The problem was not a lack of imagination.
It was precision.
Natural systems are noisy.
They fluctuate. They drift.
What this object was doing did not drift. The timing was exact. The repetition was consistent. The structure remained stable across multiple spectral bands. One researcher summarized it quietly. Nature does not hold rhythm like this. A secondary explanation emerged, more cautious, more comforting. Perhaps the object was not communicating at all. Perhaps it was an automated system, responding passively to environmental conditions. A kind of cosmic instrument, triggered by proximity to a star like our Sun, activating when radiation thresholds were crossed, signaling without awareness of who might receive it. For a moment, that explanation held. Then the data changed. 7 hours after the initial pulses, the emission pattern shifted. What most people don't know is this. During the final analysis window, something appeared in the data that was not included in any preliminary report. A detail so subtle that it was almost dismissed. The pulse sequence was not only slowing, it was converging. When analysts mapped the timing shifts against Earth's rotation, a pattern emerged. The intervals aligned with a narrow window, a recurring temporal frame that matched the moment our planet's night side faced the object directly. In other words, the signal was not simply aimed at Earth. It was synchronized with our ability to observe it. This was the first indication that the signal was not just aware of our presence,
but of our position.
And that changes everything. Because synchronization requires prediction. Prediction requires modeling. And modeling requires knowledge. The object was not reacting blindly.
It was anticipating.
That realization never reached the public. But it is now impossible to ignore. What we are witnessing may not be a first contact event as imagined in fiction.
No landing. No message in words.
No visible craft in the sky.
Just information.
Carefully structured. Mathematically precise.
Patient.
As if something ancient had been waiting for a civilization mature enough to notice patterns, instead of faces.
This may be the first test. Not of technology, but of awareness.
The universe did not arrive with answers. It arrived with a question. And for the first time, that question is directed at us. If this object has adjusted its signal once, it can do so again. If it is waiting, then what happens next depends on whether we respond, and how. This story is not finished. In fact, it has only just begun. Subscribe to Cosmic Enigma to follow the next developments, upcoming analyses, and the discoveries that are still unfolding. Because the universe has spoken. And we are only beginning to understand what it's asking.